Something I've been thinking about for a while is what is the archetype of person who is poised to benefit the most from the adoption of AI and the acceleration of AI? Obviously, there are a lot of people who are going to have the quality of their lives diminish with AI becoming more common and being integrated into more things. And that's not a good thing. I'm not in favor of that. I don't like that that's happening. However, we as individuals don't really have the opportunity to stop that. It's more of a structural change like the Industrial Revolution where it's the cat's kind of out of the bag, so to speak. And so there's not much that we as individuals can do to prevent the acceleration, in my view, at least. Maybe that's like a doomer view. But regardless, what I'm getting at though is I was thinking about, a lot of people, AI is going to be either a neutral effect on their life or it might even be a detriment to their life, unfortunately. But what is the archetype of person who is poised to benefit the most and whose life is likely to get better on account of AI becoming more prevalent and the models themselves getting better? And if you've watched the videos that I post on this channel, you probably have an inkling of what I'm going to say, but you can take your guesses, but I think you probably have an idea of where I'm going with this. And what I'm going to say is that I think the sort of person who is poised to benefit the most from AI is someone who is what would historically be described as a Renaissance man, or I suppose Renaissance woman if we want to be inclusive. But the colloquial term is Renaissance man. And what a Renaissance man is very similar in my understanding to the idea of a polymath, which used to be more prevalent back in probably 200 years ago, but is much less common now, where a polymath and a Renaissance man, it's the sort of person that has developed deep insights and impressive abilities across a large range of fields. So an example of someone like this would be Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. And I don't believe, I'm probably mispronouncing the German pretty terribly there, but if you've taken calculus, you know that Leibniz was one of the people who sort of co-authored calculus at the same time as Newton. Leibniz and Newton were developing the core ideas of calculus sort of in parallel. And so some people attribute it to Newton, some people attribute it to Leibniz, and I think the general consensus is that they both made tangible contributions, and so it's kind of attributed to both of them. Long story short, though, Leibniz is the sort of person who you could definitely describe as a polymath and a Renaissance man, where he was good at so many different things. He's most well known for his mathematical contributions, obviously, but he dabbled in so many other fields, and that's something that we really don't see much of anymore. And I think a large part of that is because a lot of fields have accrued such depth that it's very difficult for you to be even like a journeyman of more than a handful of fields because of the level of depth and knowledge and time commitment that's required. And so, previously being a Renaissance man or a polymath, that's kind of parochial to the era where a lot of these fields were still in their early development, scientifically speaking, and so it was more accessible for one person to be very good at multiple of them. Another example of a Renaissance man or a polymath would be Oswald Spengler, who was I believe he's a German author. He was a mathematician. I believe his primary occupation was being a mathematician, but he was also a philosopher and a historian, and he's got some pretty influential works. Man and Technics, which I've not read, but I've just heard it mentioned in passing. It's probably a fairly prescient work. I don't know the content of it, so that could be a totally wrong read, but just going off of the title, I imagine that he's probably looking into how industrialization is affecting, the future of the world. And so really what I'm getting at here is that this is an archetype of person which was prevalent in the past, but has all but gone extinct until recently because it's just too difficult to be really advanced in multiple fields at once. However, the point I'm getting at, the broader point that I'm trying to make here, is that with the introduction of I think the doors has been reopened for people to once again become polymaths and Renaissance men in their own regard. And in fact, it's the people that had the predisposition to be like that who are going to benefit the most from AI, where you're able to learn a whole bunch of things very quickly at a pace that otherwise would have been impossible before AI, and generally just iterate very fast and expose yourself to a whole bunch of fields at a rate that was not previously possible. And so the reason why I think people like this will become very successful as AI continues to integrate into our society is because previously, if you had an idea in your head and you wanted to build it and you wanted to transmute it from being an idea in your head and bring it into fruition into the real world, there was a tremendous amount of inertia in doing that. So if you had an idea for an app, but you didn't have any sort of coding experience, for example, then the way you would have to create that app is you'd either have to learn how to code yourself or you'd have to pay someone to implement the idea for you. So there's a tremendous amount of inertia in that you either have to have an advanced level of a technical skill yourself, or you have to be willing to pay a significant amount of money, invest significant capital up front just to try out this idea of yours, which may or may not work, but could potentially be a very big and influential idea. I think programming is probably the most clear-cut example, where obviously with the advent of AI and AI coding agents getting better, most ideas you can implement with AI and deliver a minimum viable product. I'm not saying you can build, a $1 billion business from scratch with just you and Claude Code, because when you scale beyond a certain point, you have to deal with infrastructure, you have to deal with a lot of things that you really need people with domain expertise to manage. However, if you just want to get a business off the ground, if you just want to take an idea and produce a minimum viable product and see where it goes, it has never been easier to do that with AI. And so if you're the sort of person who likes to dip your toes in a lot of different fields, you're very curious, you're very intellectually curious in particular, and you have interests that span a broad range of things, and you're someone who's been endowed with a lot of agency, and you really like taking ideas that you have and bringing them into fruition in the real world, then AI is the ultimate tool for you to do that. And so that's where I see the greatest gain. I think another gain is for people that have this predisposition to be polymaths or Renaissance men, in that AI can be an accelerant towards their learning. So if you are disciplined with it and you make sure to learn the fundamentals of something and don't delegate all of your thinking to AI, then AI can help you learn things much, much faster than previously was possible, largely because it's a very good information aggregator. So let's say you don't have any experience in, I'll talk about something I do have an experience in so I can provide a proper level of insight. Let's say you don't have any experience in university level math, and you're coming from a non-technical background, you're not in school and you want to learn it. Previously, you would need to probably take some sort of online course. Maybe if you had a high tolerance for frustration, you would just buy a textbook and read the textbook yourself. Although I feel like that's always not a good idea for beginners, because mathematicians like to write math textbooks in a way where they're kind of assuming that the audience is going to be other mathematicians, and that often renders the content very unreadable to someone who's not in the know. Anyway, I digress. What I'm getting at is that previously, if you wanted to learn math, for example, you would probably look up some free online course. You would go through the content in whatever way it's arranged in the course. Maybe it's arranged in an optimal way that's conducive to your learning, maybe it's not. But generally what you would encounter eventually is that you would get to a point where you struggle to understand something and the material in front of you is not sufficient for you to improve your understanding. And so that leads you to search the internet for other resources. And maybe you find something that helps you, or maybe you don't. But if you're trying to do something on your own without being in a structured university setting, then if you don't understand something and you can't find a resource to help you understand it, then you're pretty much just stuck. But now the whole window is shifted completely, where if you don't understand something, you can talk to AI, which is useful to think of as just like a tool that's very good at indexing the whole internet. And especially if you tell it to substantiate its output with resources rather than just going off of vibes, it does a pretty good job of giving you accurate output for fairly common queries. Nowadays, you basically have a tutor that you can talk to about nearly any subject with infinite levels of patience and infinite bandwidth. So if you're trying to learn math and you're not in school, you're literally just sitting at home trying to learn calculus, for example, you get stuck on something, you get stuck on Riemann sums, and you find Riemann sums hard to understand, and the resources that you look up about them aren't helping you. You can just talk to AI, and it's seen probably millions, probably tens of millions of examples and instances in its training data pertaining to Riemann sums. And it can explain it to you in dozens of different ways, and if you keep saying, I don't understand, help me with this, it's never going to get frustrated with you. It's never going to give up on you, so to speak. And so really, if you're the sort of person that has agency and drive to learn a lot of things, and really learn a large breadth of things, then AI is going to allow you to do that at a level of efficiency which has pretty much never been seen before. And if you're the sort of person who has deep knowledge, well, maybe deep is not the right word, but let's say like waist deep knowledge in a dozen different fields, and you have the ability to build things very quickly, prototype things, as I was discussing with AI as well, then you are really poised to take these good ideas that would previously have been floating around in your head, but you would have encountered too much inertia for you to implement them, and now there's very little inertia to take an idea in your head and transmute it into reality. And so that's the class of people that I see benefiting the most from the introduction of AI. It's people that really like to learn just as a character attribute of them as a person. They love to learn. They'd love to learn a huge breadth of different things, and they want to build things. And if you check all of those boxes, then there's probably never been a better time in history to try to build a business or build a product or try something new, because the barrier to entry is lower than it's ever been. The inertia for creating things is lower than it's ever been. And so if you're the sort of person who just wants to get a 9-to-5, a simple job, and just live an average life, then AI is really not a good thing for you, because it's infringing on the area, the sector of the economy that you want to occupy. But if you're the sort of person who is unconventional and really enjoys learning, really enjoys becoming acquainted with a lot of different technical domains, and has ideas that they want to try to test out and see, hey, is this worth exploring? This is the best time ever to do that. I really do believe that. And so if we want to procure a white pill from the haystack of black pills related to AI becoming more prevalent and getting better, this is what I would say. I'd say if you're this sort of person, then this is the best time in history for you to have the attributes or the inclinations of a polymath or a Renaissance man. And if that doesn't describe you right now, but what I've described seems like something that is alluring to you and you want to do more, then the field is wide open. You can get started. And I would encourage you to do so. If you have an idea that you want to pursue, if you have something you want to learn, leverage the advantages that you have now and just do it, because who knows what the future holds. There's probably a lot of disruption inbound to historical things in the market, to historical social roles, and just jobs in general. So if you've got an idea, now is the time to pursue it. And if you're the sort of person that is like an ideas guy, but also likes to learn stuff, then you basically have just been supercharged, and the world is yours for the taking. So Let me know your guys' thoughts on this. Am I being too optimistic? Am I not being pessimistic enough? Just let me know.